What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave, and today we are talking about another very spicy deck list. Definitely excited about this one. This is something I've been working on and kind of toying around with idea-wise since all the spoilers for the new set were announced, and I could really see all of the cards. This is something that John has been wanting to build, so we finally got a list put together, and we're going to be talking about it today. I'm very excited about this one. Before we talk about the deck list, as always, a big shout out to the Patreons for making the giveaways on the channel possible. You guys are the real MVPs. I don't know what I would do with this channel without you guys. You guys are the ones who keep things ticking. As a small YouTuber, the people who really take the time to support the channel make a world of difference. If you may not have the means to join the Patreon, liking the videos, subscribing to the channel helps us out a ton, and those things are greatly appreciated, so make sure you're slapping that sub button. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into talking about Emerald Steel Pirates. So the first card in the 1-drop slot for a Pirates list, this should be no surprise to anybody, is going to be 4 Captain Hook Forceful Duelist, a 1-cost inkable 1/2 stat line questing for 1, but he does have Challenger 2, so he is going to be challenging for 3. As a 1-drop, that's pretty freaking good. He does die to a lot of the steel meta, but this deck has other alternative excellent 1-drops to deal with the steel meta. So if you're not in that steel matchup and you're not worried about that first turn removal, if you're not going in something like a Cinderella or a turn 1 Bell, Captain Hook is going to be very good. If they're not getting their Bell out until turn 2, Captain Hook can still be very good, or if you're on the play. Next up, we've got a new pirate in the list, and this card is kind of getting overlooked in my opinion, and that is going to be Pete Pirate Scoundrel, a 1-cost inkable 1/2 stat line questing for 1 with whenever you play an action that isn't a song, you may banish chosen item. Obviously, a lot of these decks are wanting to play actions that are songs, but with this one, you're playing actions that aren't songs. There's actually a couple new cards that are going to work with that ability, so when you steer into it, it starts to become really good, especially if you sit down to that matchup with something like Fishbone Quill. Other people are playing things like Benja. Benja's okay. He dies to Brawl as soon as he comes into play. He may take out a Fishbone Quill in real time, but Pete is gonna be something entirely different. Not only is he gonna give you the ability to be banishing those Fishbone Quills, but if they use a Brawl on a 1-cost Pete, it doesn't feel nearly as bad as a Brawl on a Benja. He's also a shift target. Next up in the 1-cost slot, if you've been around the channel for a while, you should know I am a huge fan of this card. I think this card is extremely good in the current meta. I think if people were going a lot of higher end decks with stronger characters, it does tend to become less good, but I've even had situations against things like Maui Hero to All, where they challenge in, take out a character of mine with 3 strength, and then I'm able to pick it off with a Fire the Cannons. So don't rule out Fire the Cannons for taking out those big threats, but in those first couple turns of the game, this card is absolutely huge as a 1-cost uninkable action that's going to let you deal 2 damage to a chosen character. So if they go turn 1 Cinderella pass, obviously playing that Captain Hook or playing that Pete isn't going to feel so good anymore. Again, we do have some alternative options, but if you have that Fire the Cannons in hand, get that Cinderella right off the board and then start establishing your guys on turn 2. One of those alternative options for our turn 1 in that steel matchup is going to be 4 Hidden Cove, a 1-cost inkable location, 1 to move in, 6 willpower, and when characters are located here, they're going to be getting +1 strength and +1 willpower. This is not gaining you any lore per turn, but being able to pump up those characters is huge. You go turn 1 Hidden Cove, then you throw down that Captain Hook or that Pete on turn 2, all of a sudden they have 3 willpower by being moved into Hidden Cove. Not to mention that Hook is potentially challenging for 4 at that point. Next up, still in the 1-drop slot, we have DeVille Manor. It is worth noting this is derivative of another Pirates deck list that I did last set, so if you haven't seen that deck list, definitely check that out. It is very similar type of build, but we have obviously taken advantage of some fantastic new characters that have been added alongside set 7 that I think have really taken this deck list to the next level. We were already winning lots of games with it during set 6, but I think now with the new inclusions, it is a real meta contender. We have 4 DeVille Manor, a 1-cost inkable location, 1 to move in, 4 willpower, and it's going to gain you 1 passive lore at the beginning of each turn. It's worth noting about a third of this deck is 1-cost cards. Next up, we are on 3 The Bayou Mysterious Swamp, a 1-cost inkable location, 1 to move in, 3 willpower this time, so we just keep ticking down on the willpower with these 1-cost locations, 1 passive lore at the beginning of each turn. Whenever character quests will here, you can draw and discard a card. It's not an irrelevant ability. There are definitely instances where you may have multiple docks docks in your hand, for instance, and the Bayou becomes pretty good with that quest draw and discard ability, because you can draw, discard one of the docks, maybe play the new card that you drew, and then play your other dock to draw 2 additional cards, just kind of keeping your foot on the gas. Moving over to the 2-cost slot, this is a card that is an absolute necessity whether you're playing pirates or not. Pretty much anything I play with steel is going to have at least 3 Mr. Smee Bumbling Mate, if not 4. As a 2-cost inkable 3/3 stat line, he's already extremely good. You add into it the fact that he can quest for 2, he just becomes absolutely phenomenal. He's taking 1 damage at the end of each of your turns if you don't have a captain in play, but obviously with things like Captain Hook and some of the other cards that we're going to talk about going forward, it's actually pretty easy to have a captain in play and keep that Smee from taking damage with this deck. Next up, we are on 2 Ursula Deceiver, a 2-cost inkable 1/3 stat line questing for 1. With when you play this character, you get to look at your opponent's hand. That in and of itself is a fantastic ability, because you're really going to get a lay of the land and know what's coming next, and you get to discard a song card of your choice. The reason we're only on 2 Ursulas in this deck is because we are all in on a full suite of Pete's as a shift target, and Pete is going to be able to slow down those actions until you get to a point where you need to really rip it away, like a Be Prepared or something like that. So Ursula isn't necessarily a card you're wanting to see in your starting hand. It's a card you potentially want to draw into to be able to deal with those actions after you run out of Pete triggers. Next up, we are on 3 Calhouns, a 2-cost uninkable 3/2 stat line questing for 1. I think there's absolutely an argument for playing 4 Calhouns. We were trying to keep the non-pirate character count fairly low, so we can always be taking advantage of those triggers. She does have resist +1, so obviously that's fantastic into anything playing steel. And during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you're going to gain 2 lore. So she is a great way to keep your foot on the gas with the lore gain while still being able to deal with those small threats on your opponent's side of the board. Next up, another one where you can make an argument for going to 4 of these. We are on 3 Doc Bold Knight, a 2-cost uninkable 1/3 stat line questing for 1. I already mentioned this a little bit before, but when Doc comes into play, you're going to be able to discard the cards in your hand to draw 2 new cards. Worth noting, if you have no cards in your hand, you don't have to discard anything to draw those cards. So always keep that in mind with Doc. Doesn't matter if you have a hand or not, you're still going to be able to take advantage of that draw trigger. Next up, to take advantage of those non-song action triggers that we are playing in this deck, we are on 3 Baboons, a 2-cost uninkable action, deal 2 damage to chosen character or location. So it's going to be a great way again to pick off those locations or those characters. It is also inkable, so if you just need the ink, you can ink it, but ideally you want to be able to play it to take advantage of its ability and the abilities of the characters around it. Not always as relevant with the Pete, but it is more relevant with one of the cards we're going to talk about when we get to the 3-cost slot. Last up in the 2-cost slot, we're on 3 Seven Dwarves Mine Secure Fortress, a 2-cost inkable, 2 to move in, 6 willpower, 1 passive lore at the beginning of each turn, and during your turn, the first time you move a character here, you may deal 1 damage to chosen character. If it's a knight, you only have a few knights in this deck, but if it's a knight and you move it in there, you're going to be able to deal 2 damage instead. What's really nice about this card is it is a solid 2-cost location, so whether you're using the ability or not, it's just still really good in this deck. Next up, as I mentioned, we are on a full suite of Pete. We have 4 Pete Games Referee, a 3-cost inkable 3/3 stat line. With when you play this character, opponents can't play actions until the start of your next turn. He is going to be gaining you 1 lore when he quests, but that ability is where it's at. He just shuts off anything they do, means they can't remove him. He's going to be able to always quest, because when he comes down, he's preventing actions. So unless they're doing something like Sapphire Coil Medusa shenanigans, or I guess Sapphire Coil and Small Sisu, there's really not anything else in the game that's going to deal with Pete. Next up, and this is the other card I said we were going to talk about when we get to that 3-cost slot, we are on 3 Mr. Smee Efficient Captain, a 3-cost uninkable 3/3 stat line. Is a captain, worth noting, so he is going to prevent that smaller Smee from taking damage. And whenever you play an action that isn't a song, you may ready chosen pirate character. This is one of the few cards that says you can ready a character and doesn't say that they can't quest. So you can ready a character and they can potentially quest again. You could potentially quest 3 times. So say for instance you have 2 fire cannons in your hand, and we'll jump over to the next card I'm going to talk about just to kind of get this in the mix, and that is going to be John Silver. But you have 2 fire cannons in your hand and John Silver on board, which says for each location you have in play, this character gains resist +1 and +1 lore. So you quest in with John Silver, so you have 2 locations out, you quest in, you get 3 lore, and Mr. Smee out, you fire the cannons, you ready your John Silver, you quest in again, you fire the cannons, you ready your John Silver, you quest in again. All of a sudden you're talking about questing for 9 with one character pretty early in the game, which is kind of nutty. Mr. Smee can be really good. He is uninkable, so you don't have any way to ink him. The only other way to really kind of get rid of him with this deck is going to be taking advantage of the Bayou to discard him if he is not as useful to you in whatever current situation you may be in. But I think more often than not, especially if you're holding an action, he is going to be pretty good. Then we are talking about John Silver, Greedy Treasure Seeker, a 3-cost inkable 3/3 stat line, questing for 1. I already mentioned the ability. He's going to get +1 resist, +1 lore for each location you have in play. Hence why we're playing some of the small 1-cost locations that in most other decks are going to be good. When you start kind of combining them with John Silver, they start to become very good. Like I mentioned, that Bayou ability isn't irrelevant either. There are some instances where you want to take advantage of discarding those uninkables to get some new inkables in your hand, but John Silver still really good. Not necessarily a card a lot of people are teched for. Obviously Sapphire Coil is again going to deal with it. That matchup is just going to be tough for you in general with this deck, but that matchup is tough for pretty much everybody with every deck, because that deck just removes everything you do, and then it just wins by questing with one big character. So ideally you'll be able to win the game before that's a problem, or you'll just have your foot so much on the gas that they won't really be able to concentrate on developing their own field. Ideally, the last action we are playing is 2 Smash, a card that's kind of fallen out of favor in the newer sets, but is really good when you talk about combining it with those non-song action cards, and that is a 3-cost inkable action, deal 3 damage to chosen character. Smash is incredibly situational, but it is inkable, and that's what makes it very balanced. We're only on 2, we're on 9 total actions with this deck, which, believe it or not, is plenty. You don't need to take advantage of those triggers a million times. If you can take advantage of that ready trigger even a couple times in a game, it's the difference of having 2, 3, 6 more lore. You know, it can get kind of out of hand with the John Silvers, even with the Smees. So you don't need a million actions. There is an argument for going up to maybe 3 Smash or something like that if you feel more comfortable with that, but you tell me where you cut cards, because I would love to know. Next up, our only 4-cost character. We are on 3 Daisy Duck Pirate Captain, a 4-cost inkable 3/3 stat line, also a captain, questing for 2. With whenever one of your pirate characters quests, will add a location, draw a card. So again, this is a potential use case for moving your pirates into those locations. Even like the Bayou, even if you don't need to take advantage of that ability, it is a May ability, so you don't have to use it. But if you do Daisy Duck with the Bayou, for instance, you do have the ability to stack those triggers how you would like. So you could potentially draw your card for the Bayou and then discard and then draw a card, or draw a card and then draw for the Bayou and discard if you get a card that you don't like. So keep that in mind. Those triggers are going to be entering the bag, and you can take advantage of them any way that you like when it comes to the Bayou specifically. But Daisy Duck can be really good for some unexpected card draw against your opponent. And the last card in the deck, and a card that is extremely good and made me steer more into pirates with that build. This is even getting played in non-pirate centric builds, and that is Pete Space Pirate, a 6-cost inkable 5/5 stat line, questing for 2. Super solid stat line, shifting for 4. So as soon as you're getting those Pete game referees down on 3, preventing them from dying, you're ready on 4 to go ahead and shift into this big Pete. And while this character is exerted, opposing characters can't exert to sing songs. So fantastic into Steel Song, fantastic into Sapphire Steel, into Sapphire Ruby. All of those decks are going to want to be singing songs to some extent. So if you can shut that off really early, it's really going to cripple their game plan and potentially prevent them from ramping as fast. Or in the instance of Steel Song, they're really going to have to choose if they want to develop their field or deal with your field, since they'll no longer be able to do both in a single turn. He does also give all pirate characters resist +1 when he's exerted. That says all pirate characters. As noted, he is a pirate character, so that is going to include him. So he is all of a sudden, as soon as he's exerted, going to essentially be a 5/6 stat line because of that resist. So he's going to be staying outside of things even like Along Came Zeus, and he's going to be making your other pirates that much harder to deal with. Even though he is not a captain, if you have him down with a Mr. Smee, for instance, Mr. Smee is no longer going to take a damage at the end of your turn as long as your Pete is exerted, because Mr. Smee would then have resist +1, which does prevent that damage even to himself. So it's a really kind of interesting combination with a lot of the cards in the deck. I think Pete Space Pirate is really good and has taken this deck overall to another level. What are your thoughts in the comments below? Would you play the more traditional build that we're seeing with like Diablos and discard shenanigans, Prince Johns, or do you think it's more fun to play this pirate centric build of it? Do you think the deck can be legitimately competitive? I do. I know I've seen this deck do well even before we've added some of these new set 7 cards, so I feel good about where it's at. I know sometimes people don't always see eye to eye with me when it comes to these deck lists, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below if you should just play traditional or if it is worth it to play the pirate build. On Monday, we will have our first fan deck list coming up. I got a request for a budget version of a popular deck, and I'm honestly pretty excited about where it's at. I think it's pretty legitimately competitive, and I made it about $200 cheaper, $250 cheaper than it would typically be, so I think it is going to be a lot of fun. So if you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. You can come back, stick around for that one, see another sweet budget deck, and we've got lots of other deck lists coming down the pipeline. But as always, when you see those toys, video games, and Pete referees stalling the board off in the distance, remember, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.